Central Sub 117 scene is secured at a Whiskey Fox, Whiskey Mike, both gunshot wounds to the head.
Sir, I want to let you know because of the scene, I did go get a gun and bring it down here.
It's in your vehicle? Do you have any guns on you at all?
No, sir. It's leaning up against the side of my car.
Okay. You're fine, man. You're fine. Turn around for me.
I don't have any guns.
Okay. Yes, sir. I see that. Okay. This is your wife and son?
And son.
Okay.
It's bad. It's bad. Check the pulses.
Yes, sir. This is the firearm you brought from inside the house?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I went and got. This is a long story. My son was in a boat wreck a few months back. He's been getting threats. Most of it's been benign stuff we didn't take serious.
Okay.
You know, he's been getting like punched. I know that's somebody. I know that's what it is.
Okay. When did you get home? Right when you called, or did you go to the house first? Where is the house?
I came to the house first. My mom has late stages Alzheimer's, and my dad is in the hospital.
Okay.
I left. I don't know what time. I can go back on my phone and tell you the exact times. Did you check?
Okay. Did I check what?
Did you check them?
We got medical guys that are. That's what they're gonna do. Okay.
What are they doing? Can they hurry?
They are. Yes, sir. That gentleman that was out here already. He's one of the battalion chiefs. Okay. How did you pull up? You from back there?
I went to the house and they weren't home, which was odd. I tried to call.
Okay.
And then I knew they had been down here before I left to go to my mom's.
Okay.
And so that is loaded.
Okay.
You might want to unload it. But I mean.
Is this the only firearm with you? This is the only one, or is there any more in the truck?
I believe that's it.
You think that's the only one? Okay.
I'm 99%.
Do you normally
sure
have any other firearms in your vehicle?
I don't, but occasionally occasionally there's a pistol in there.
Okay. Just wait right here for me for a second, okay?
Central House.
Copy. Kill your front lights, I can't see.
653 outside.
Enjoy it, sir.
Yeah, well, I've already spoken with Captain Deal. He's got crime scene. He's contacted them. He's also going to give us the assistance of a couple of field agents.
Roger that.
I'm even checking. They're
8 to
dead.
10 out.
They are dead, aren't
I
they?
just turned on those.
Yes, sir. That's what it looks like.
Randy. Maggie's all are dead. Where are you now?
On the night of June 7, 2021, in a quiet, rural stretch of Colleton County, South Carolina, a call came into emergency dispatch. It was just after 10 p.m. The caller identified himself as Alex Murdaugh, a local attorney from one of the most powerful legal families in the region. His voice was strained but controlled, urgent yet measured. He told the dispatcher he had just arrived at his family's hunting property, known as Moselle. And there, near the dog kennels, he said he found his wife and son. Both were dead. He struggled to explain what he was seeing. His words came in fragments. He repeated himself. At moments, he sounded disoriented. At others, unusually precise. He told the dispatcher his wife, Maggie Murdaugh, and his younger son, Paul, had been shot. Law enforcement was dispatched immediately. When deputies arrived, they found a scene that defied easy explanation. 2 victims. 2 different weapons. No signs of forced entry. No immediate suspect. And standing nearby was Alex Murdaugh himself, husband, father, and the man who had made the call. At first, there was no public reason to doubt him. The Murdaugh name carried weight here. For generations, the family had shaped the legal system of South Carolina's Lowcountry, from courtrooms to prosecutors' offices to law enforcement itself. Alex Murdaugh was not just another grieving family member. He was a lawyer who understood investigations. He was a man who knew how narratives were built. And he was someone who, for decades, had operated with the confidence of a person accustomed to control. In the hours after the murders, Alex gave statements to investigators. He described his movements that evening, where he had been, what he had done, when he had last seen his wife and son alive.
To do this.
I understand.
Yeah.
I totally understand.
Yeah.
So you don't have any problem with it.
So, just start at the top, take your time.
Like when I came back here,
Sorry.
and I could see his brain on and I ran over. I tried to turn him over, and I don't know. I figured it out. His cell phone popped out of his pocket. I started to try to do something with it, thinking maybe, but then I put it back down really quickly. Then I went to my wife, and I could see.
Did you touch?
And I called 911 pretty much right away, and she was very good. I talked to her. I told her I was going to get off the phone to call some family members. I did that.
What family members did you call?
I called my brother Randy, and I called my brother John. And I tried to call a little boy, a real good friend that's right around the corner from here, but I didn't get him.
Okay. What all was around Paul when you walked up?
Blood.
Anything else?
I mean, there were some body things, yes, sir.
I mean, like any other evidence? I know you said the phone fell out the pocket, but did you see anything else that didn't belong or shouldn't belong or that wasn't part of Paul?
No, sir, not good. No, sir.
How about Maggie?
No, sir.
You didn't see anything around them? What made you come out here tonight?
I went to, my mom's a late stage Alzheimer's patient. My dad's in the hospital. My mom gets anxious when she does. I went to check on them and Maggie. Maggie's a dog lover, and she fools with the dogs. And I knew she'd gone to the kennel. I was at the house. I left the house and went to my mom's for just a little while. Tried to call her when I left. Texted her, no response. When I got back to the house was obviously nobody was in there, so I figured they're still up here fooling around. Paul was gonna be getting set up to plant. Our sunflower seeds got sprayed and died, and he was refiguring to plant the sunflower seeds. So I came back up here and I drove up and saw and called.
Had Maggie and Paul been arguing over anything?
No.
What was their relationship like?
Wonderful.
Wonderful. How about yours and Maggie's?
Wonderful. I mean, I'm sure we had little things here and there, but we had a wonderful marriage, wonderful relationship.
And yours and Paul's relationship?
As good as it could be.
How old was Paul?
22.
Okay. Have you talked with any of these guys tonight?
Talked with Nolan, yes, sir.
Is he out here?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I tried to call Rogan, was one of the people he's the boy that I told you lives around the corner.
Okay.
That's very, he's just a good, helpful young man. You mind if I open the door really quickly?
Go right ahead. Do what you need to do. So is there anybody that you can think of that we need to talk to tonight? Is there a name that comes to mind?
I mean, I can't tell you anybody that I'm overly suspicious of off the top of my head.
Okay.
I mean, this is such a stupid thing. I'm even embarrassed to say it. But it just didn't make any sense. I just hired a guy out here, and he wasn't cutting the mustard, but I hadn't told him this yet. Paul's been working with him a lot. He killed the sunflower seeds in our dove field just recently, which is why Paul was here doing this. He told Paul a story the other day about how when he was in high school, he got in a fight with some black guys. And the FBI undercover team observed him fighting those guys and put him on an undercover team with 3 Navy SEALs. And their job was to kill radical Black Panthers. And they did that from Myrtle Beach to Savannah. Now, I really don't think this guy, is probably the person, but that's just so friggin'.
Yeah, that's kind of far-fetched story.
That's weird. But he was off today.
Okay.
He took his daddy to the doctor.
What's his name?
CB Rowe.
R-O-W-E?
Yeah, and I sent him a message to text me earlier today about the sunflowers, and he called me back when I was on the way to my mom's house.
Did you talk to him at that time?
Briefly, I was on the phone with a lawyer friend of mine named Chris Wilson from Bamberg, so I told him I'd call him back tomorrow and see him in the morning.
When you briefly talked to Mr. Rowe, what was his demeanor or attitude? Or
I mean, it seemed normal. I mean, I asked him about the sunflowers, and so, I'm sure he's a little bit.
Where does he live?
I don't exactly know. Somewhere in Bronson.
Okay. Do you have his phone number?
I do.
You got it with you, please, sir?
I do.
At the time, his account appeared straightforward. But what investigators did not yet know, what no one outside a small circle would understand for months, was that this story would not remain intact. Because hidden within phones, vehicles, and digital records was a version of that night that could not be rewritten. And over time, piece by piece, the distance between what Alex Murdaugh said and what the evidence showed would begin to close. This is not just the story of a double homicide. It is the story of how a carefully constructed life, built on influence, trust, and deception, began to unravel. And how, in the end, a single night exposed a web of lies that could no longer hold. To understand why Alex Murdaugh was not immediately viewed as a suspect, it's necessary to understand the name he carried. For nearly a century, the Murdaugh family occupied a position of extraordinary influence in South Carolina's Lowcountry, an influence that extended far beyond any single courtroom. Beginning in 1920, members of the Murdaugh family served as solicitors, the equivalent of district attorneys, for the region's 14th Judicial Circuit. For 3 generations, the role passed from father to son, shaping how justice was pursued, negotiated, and enforced across 5 counties. For decades, if a case mattered in the Lowcountry, the Murdaughs were never far from it. They prosecuted crimes. They worked alongside law enforcement. They decided which cases moved forward and which quietly disappeared. This continuity created something rare in the American legal system. A single family whose authority became institutional. Judges, deputies, Clerks and attorneys came and went. The Murdaugh name remained. Alongside their prosecutorial power, the family built a thriving civil law practice. Their firm, later known as PMBD, specialized in personal injury litigation, securing large settlements and verdicts that further cemented their reputation and wealth. To many in the community, the Murdaughs were not just lawyers. They were the legal system. That power brought trust. It also brought fear. Locals understood that crossing the family, whether in court or outside it, often came with consequences. Law enforcement agencies relied on relationships that had been built over decades. Professional boundaries blurred. Familiarity became routine. And over time, that familiarity bred something more dangerous than corruption. It bred assumption. The assumption that the Murdaughs were on the right side of the law. The assumption that their explanations were credible. The assumption that scrutiny applied to others did not apply to them in the same way. By the time Alex Murdaugh came of age, this system was already in place. He did not have to create influence. He inherited it. And when tragedy struck at Moselle, that history mattered, because it shaped how events were initially interpreted, how questions were framed, and how quickly doubt was allowed to form. In the early hours after the murders, investigators were not just evaluating a crime scene. They were operating inside a legacy that had, for generations, existed above suspicion. And at its center was Alex Murdaugh, a man raised inside the machinery of justice, who understood exactly how it worked. Within that legacy, Alex Murdaugh found his place. To the outside world, he did not resemble a powerful figure in the traditional sense. He was not distant or aloof. He was approachable, talkative, known for his easy manner and familiarity with people from every corner of the Lowcountry. Friends and colleagues described him as someone who remembered names, asked questions, and made others feel included. In a region where relationships mattered as much as resumes, Alex Murdaugh understood how to move comfortably between worlds. Professionally, he followed the path laid out before him. He attended law school. He joined the family firm. He built a career representing injured clients, often people facing their worst moments, against large companies and insurance carriers. In court, Alex was known less for precision than for persuasion. He leaned into emotion. He spoke plainly. He presented himself as someone fighting for ordinary people against powerful interests. And it worked. Over time, he secured substantial settlements and verdicts, reinforcing the firm's standing and his own reputation as a successful trial lawyer. Within the community, his role extended beyond the courtroom. He was a fixture at local events, a familiar face to law enforcement officers, judges, and court staff. Importantly, Alex Murdaugh did not operate on the margins of the system. He operated at its center. He understood how investigations unfolded, how statements were recorded, how timelines were interpreted, and how uncertainty could work in someone's favor. That understanding shaped how he was perceived when the unimaginable happened. On the night Maggie and Paul were killed, Alex was not viewed as an outsider to be examined cautiously. He was viewed as a colleague, a professional, someone who knew the rules, someone who could be trusted to tell the truth. In the days that followed, his grief appeared visible. He spoke with investigators. He leaned on relationships that had been built over decades. And for a time, the assumption remained intact, that Alex Murdaugh was a victim of circumstance, not its architect. But public personas are sustained by consistency. And when pressure increases, even carefully maintained images begin to fracture. As investigators would soon learn, the version of Alex Murdaugh the community thought it knew was not the version preserved by the evidence. And with that realization, the foundation that had protected him for so long would begin to shift, quietly at first and then all at once. The first visible fracture did not come from a courtroom or a balance sheet. It came from the water. In the early morning hours of February 24, 2019, a 17-foot boat slammed into a bridge piling in Beaufort County, South Carolina. The crash was violent. The impact threw passengers into the dark, cold water. One of them, Mallory Beach, 19 years old, did not survive. The boat was owned by the Murdaugh family, and it was being driven by Paul Murdaugh, Alex's younger son. From the moment first responders arrived, the case carried complications. Witnesses described confusion at the scene. Accounts differed. Questions were raised about alcohol consumption, responsibility, and influence. Paul was visibly intoxicated. Hospital staff later documented his condition. Yet in the hours after the crash, attention seemed to drift, not toward accountability, but toward management. Family members arrived quickly. Alex Murdaugh was among them. According to testimony and reports, he attempted to speak with witnesses, offered explanations, and inserted himself into the unfolding situation. To some, it felt instinctive. To others, inappropriate. Law enforcement's handling of the case would later be scrutinized. Body camera footage showed uncertainty. Conflicting statements went unchallenged. The process appeared unusually deferential. For the first time, the Murdaugh name was not shielding the family from attention, it was drawing it. Paul Murdaugh was eventually charged with multiple felony counts related to the crash, including boating under the influence causing death. The case moved slowly, but it moved forward, and with it came civil lawsuits. Mallory Beach's family filed a wrongful death suit, naming Paul Murdaugh and Alex Murdaugh among the defendants. The litigation threatened something the family had long managed to avoid: discovery, depositions, financial records, internal scrutiny. This was not a criminal investigation controlled by familiar systems. It was a civil case driven by evidence and exposure. For Alex Murdaugh, the boat crash marked a turning point, not because of what it proved, but because of what it risked revealing. For the first time, the machinery that had always worked quietly in the background was under pressure. And that pressure was not going away. It was building. As the legal process surrounding the boat crash unfolded, something else began to change, more subtle at first, but no less significant. Public perception. For years, the Murdaugh name had operated largely outside public scrutiny. Their influence was local, their reputation reinforced by familiarity rather than examination. But the death of Mallory Beach altered that balance. Details of the crash spread beyond the Lowcountry. Media coverage intensified. Court filings became public. And questions that once circulated quietly now reached a broader audience. Why had Paul Murdaugh not been arrested at the scene? Why did witness statements appear inconsistent? Why did law enforcement seem hesitant? As body camera footage was released, viewers noticed moments that felt unusual: officers deferring, conversations going unchecked, a visible reluctance to challenge the family directly. For the first time, the system the Murdaughs had long navigated with ease was being observed from the outside. The civil lawsuit moved forward, and with it came a deeper look into the family's affairs. Depositions were scheduled. Financial disclosures loomed. The protections once offered by discretion and familiarity began to erode. Within the community, opinions shifted. Some remained loyal, seeing the family as victims of circumstance. Others began to question what they had long accepted. The idea that the Murdaughs operated differently, under different rules, was no longer whispered. It was discussed openly. For Alex Murdaugh, this change mattered. The trust he had relied on, professional, personal, and institutional, was no longer guaranteed. Every appearance carried weight. Every statement was examined more closely than before. And while the boat crash itself remained unresolved, its consequences were already taking shape. Pressure had entered the system, not as an accusation, but as scrutiny. And once scrutiny takes hold, it rarely releases its grip. As the months passed, the cracks in the foundation did not close. They widened. As scrutiny around the Murdaugh family increased, attention began to drift toward events that had long faded from public view. Cases that, at the time, had been explained, filed away, and largely forgotten. One of them dated back to July 2015. In the early morning hours, Stephen Smith, a 19-year-old nursing student, was found dead on a rural road in Hampton County. His body lay in the middle of the roadway. His car was discovered several miles away, out of gas. From the beginning, the circumstances were difficult to reconcile. Stephen had suffered a severe head injury. There was no debris, no skid marks, no clear indication of a vehicle strike. Still, The death was classified as a hit and run. His family questioned that conclusion almost immediately. They described injuries that did not align with a traffic accident. They asked why certain investigative steps were never taken. Why leads appeared to go nowhere. Among the rumors that circulated quietly in the community was a familiar name: the Murdaughs. No charges were filed. No suspects were named. And over time, the case went cold, its questions unanswered, its conclusions unresolved. For years, Stephen Smith's death existed on the periphery of low-country conversation. Mentioned cautiously, never pursued publicly, until 2021. During the investigation into the murders at Moselle, information surfaced that caused authorities to take a second look at Stephen Smith's case. Evidence gathered during the Murdaugh inquiry was turned over to the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. The file was reopened. Officials did not announce new suspects. They did not revise earlier conclusions. They offered few details. Only confirmation that the case was once again under review. For the public, the reopening did not provide answers. It raised questions. Questions about how certain deaths were handled. About which possibilities were explored, and which were not. About whether influence had shaped outcomes in ways that were never fully examined. Stephen Smith's death did not suddenly become evidence of wrongdoing, but it became something else. A reminder that some stories do not end when investigations close. They wait. And as pressure mounted around the Murdaugh family, those unresolved questions, long dormant, began to resurface, demanding to be reconsidered. Another death, closer to home, carried its own unanswered questions. In February 2018, Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh family's longtime housekeeper, died after an incident at the family's Moselle property. She had worked for the Murdaughs for more than 2 decades. Friends and family described her as dependable, private, and deeply connected to the household. To those who knew her, she was not just an employee, she was a constant presence. According to initial accounts, Gloria Satterfield suffered a fall at the Moselle home. She was taken to the hospital, where she later died from her injuries. At the time, her death did not trigger a criminal investigation. There was no autopsy, no law enforcement inquiry into the circumstances of the fall. No immediate challenge to the explanation provided. Instead, the matter appeared to resolve quietly. In the months that followed, Alex Murdaugh contacted Gloria Satterfield's sons. He told them he intended to help. He explained that his insurance policies would cover the loss and encouraged them to pursue a claim. They trusted him. What they did not know, what would not come to light for years, was that a settlement was reached in their mother's name and the money never reached them. The insurance proceeds, totaling millions of dollars, were diverted elsewhere. At the time of Gloria Satterfield's death, none of this was public. There were no headlines, no suspicion, no visible reason to question the narrative. But years later, as investigators began examining Alex Murdaugh's finances, the circumstances surrounding her death were revisited. Her body was exhumed. An autopsy was performed. And the quiet handling of the case was scrutinized for the first time. Once again, officials refrained from drawing conclusions. But the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. 2 deaths, years apart, both resolved quickly. Both were revisited only after outside scrutiny forced a second look. Individually, neither case proved misconduct. Together, they suggested something else. That some stories in the Lowcountry had been closed not because they were understood, but because no one had pressed them open. And as the pressure surrounding Alex Murdaugh continued to build, these unresolved deaths no longer felt distant. They felt connected. Not by proof, but by proximity, silence, and time. And they would not remain in the background for much longer. By the summer of 2021, pressure surrounded Alex Murdaugh from multiple directions: civil litigation, public scrutiny, and questions that no longer stayed confined to private conversations. Then, on the night of June 7th, everything converged. In the hours after Maggie and Paul were found dead, Alex Murdaugh spoke with investigators and began outlining his account of the evening. According to his statements, the night had been unremarkable. He said the family had dinner together at Moselle. Afterward, Maggie and Paul remained on the property, while he left to visit his mother at her home in Alameda. He described the visit as brief, explaining that his mother, who suffered from dementia, required care and attention. After leaving Alameda, Alex said he returned to Moselle. That was when he claimed to have discovered the bodies. He told investigators he found Maggie and Paul near the dog kennels, shot and unresponsive. He said he checked their bodies for signs of life, attempted to turn Paul over, and then called 911.
They are dead, aren't they?
I just turn on those.
Yes, sir. That's what it looks like.
Randy. Maggie's Paul are dead. Where are you now? All right. Yeah, the police are here now. The police are here now.
Affirmative.
That's my brother.
Okay. When was the last time you were here with them? Or talked to them or anything like that?
It was earlier tonight. I don't know the exact time, but
Okay.
I left. I was probably gone an hour and a half from my mom's, and I saw them about 45 minutes before that.
Okay.
I rode around with Paul for 2 hours this afternoon in the pickup truck.
That's your son, Paul? Okay.
Somebody going to check him?
Yes, sir. They've already checked them.
They did check him?
Yes, sir.
It's official that they're dead?
Yes, sir. That's what it looks like.
I'm sorry.
No. You're fine.
I'm very sorry. Gotta call her parents.
What's her name?
Her name is Maggie Murdaugh. Margaret Brandstetter Murdaugh. How you doing?
What's her birthday?
9/15/68.
Okay. And what's your son's first name? You said Paul?
Paul Carey Murdaugh.
And what's his birthday?
Jason, if you have anybody
4.
coming through town that could stop and pick up that tent, I see lighting off in the distance.
What are they covering them up?
I got some getting dressed now, Sheriff. I'll have somebody stop and grab it.
Tell them they don't have to do that.
Throughout his early interviews, Alex maintained that he had not been at the kennels earlier that night. He placed himself away from the scene during the critical window of time. The account appeared internally consistent. He provided timestamps. He described routine actions. He answered questions without hesitation. There were no obvious contradictions in his version of events, at least not on the surface. In the immediate aftermath, investigators treated Alex as a grieving husband and father. They documented his statements, secured the scene, and began the process of reconstructing the timeline. At that stage, the focus was not on deception. It was on understanding what had happened. And based solely on Alex Murdaugh's account, the story of that night seemed tragically simple. A family at their rural property. An unexplained act of violence. A man returning home to find his world destroyed. For the moment, that version stood. Unchallenged. And accepted. As Alex Murdaugh's account was recorded, investigators turned their attention to the area near the dog kennels where the bodies had been found. The Moselle property was expansive, remote, dark, and quiet at night. The kennels sat some distance from the main house, accessible by a series of paths and roads that cut through the property. There, investigators encountered a scene that immediately resisted simple explanation. Paul Murdaugh was found near the feed room of the kennels. He had suffered fatal gunshot wounds consistent with a shotgun. The injuries were severe, indicating close-range fire. A short distance away lay Maggie Murdaugh. She had been shot multiple times with a rifle. The wounds suggested she had been moving when she was struck. 2 victims. 2 different firearms. 1 location. No weapons were found at the scene. There were no clear signs of forced entry onto the property. No immediate evidence of a struggle beyond the immediate area around the bodies. No obvious indication of who had arrived or left. Investigators documented shell casings, bloodstain patterns, and the relative positions of the victims. They secured the area, photographed the scene, and began preserving physical evidence. The configuration raised questions, but at this stage, questions were procedural, not accusatory. Why 2 weapons? Why here? But the property itself offered few immediate answers. Moselle was familiar to the family, frequently used, isolated enough that gunfire might not draw attention. In the early hours of the investigation, the crime scene was treated as the site of an external attack, an act carried out by someone who knew where to go and when. That assumption shaped the initial approach. There was no immediate arrest, no suspect identified, no public theory advanced. Instead, investigators focused on documenting facts, preserving evidence, and reconstructing the sequence of events. At that moment, the crime scene existed separately from the story Alex Murdaugh had told. 2 parallel tracks. One defined by statements, the other by physical reality. It would take time before those tracks were compared closely, and longer still before anyone realized they were moving toward each other. In the days after the murders, investigators began the slow process of examining digital evidence recovered from the scene. Among the devices collected was Paul Murdaugh's cell phone. At first, it appeared unremarkable, damaged, locked, and silent. But like most modern devices, it carried a detailed record of its final moments. As analysts worked through the data, they discovered a short video recorded just minutes before Paul and Maggie were killed. The video had been captured at the dog kennels. It showed Paul filming one of the family's dogs, documenting an injury. Maggie could be heard in the background. The setting was ordinary, domestic. And then there was another voice, Alex Murdaugh's. The audio was brief but unmistakable. His voice could be heard speaking to the dogs, responding casually, present in the moment.
Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth.
Hey, Bubba.
It's a guinea.
This is a chicken. Come here, Bubba. Come here, Cash. Come here, Bubba. Cash. Quit.
The timestamp on the video placed Alex at the kennels less than 5 minutes before investigators believed the shootings occurred. This detail mattered. Until that point, Alex had consistently told investigators that he was not at the kennels that evening. He had placed himself elsewhere, away from Maggie and Paul during the critical window of time. The video contradicted that claim. It did not accuse. It did not dramatize. It simply existed. There was no panic captured. No sign of confrontation. Nothing that suggested what was about to happen. That was what made it so powerful. It showed the last known moments of normalcy. And it placed Alex Murdaugh there. For investigators, the significance was immediate, even if its implications were not yet fully explored. The case did not change direction in an instant. There were no public announcements, no arrests, no confrontations. But quietly, the foundation of Alex Murdaugh's account had been altered. Not by testimony, not by theory, but by a phone that had recorded more than its owner intended, and preserved a truth that could not be adjusted after the fact. From that moment forward, the investigation would move differently, because the story was no longer being told by one voice alone. The evidence had begun to speak. The kennel video did not immediately transform the investigation in visible ways. There was no press conference, no sudden shift in public narrative, no announcement that the case had taken a new direction. Instead, the impact unfolded quietly, inside interview rooms, evidence logs, and investigative timelines. For investigators, the video introduced a fixed point in time, one that could not be negotiated or reinterpreted. It established Alex Murdaugh's presence at the kennels at a moment he had previously said he was not there. That discrepancy required explanation. When investigators returned to Alex with the discovery, his account began to change. The certainty that had marked his earlier statements softened. Details became less precise. Gaps appeared where clarity had once been offered. The investigation did not pivot on accusation. It pivoted on comparison. Alex's statements were no longer evaluated on their own terms. They were measured against data, timestamps, movement, and recorded sound. And the kennel video was only the beginning. Once one inconsistency was identified, others became easier to see. Investigators widened their focus, expanding the digital examination beyond a single clip to encompass phones, vehicles, and location data tied to the hours before and after the murders. What had started as a review became a reconstruction. The question was no longer simply what happened at Moselle. It was whether the version of events Alex Murdaugh had provided could still be trusted at all. Importantly, this shift did not unfold in public view. For months, Alex remained free. He continued to speak with investigators. He attended funerals. He leaned on relationships built over decades. Outwardly, little appeared to have changed. But internally, the investigation had crossed a threshold. From that point forward, every statement Alex made would be checked against something that did not rely on memory or emotion. Something that did not forget. The lie did not collapse in a single moment. It weakened quietly. And once that process began, it could not be reversed. With the kennel video establishing a critical point of reference, investigators turned their attention to Alex Murdaugh's phone. What they found was not a single contradiction but a pattern. Modern smartphones record far more than calls and messages. They track movement, screen activity, orientation, and interaction. Every step, every pickup, and every unlock leaves a trace. Alex's phone was no exception. Analysts began reconstructing his movements minute by minute on the night of June 7th. What emerged was a detailed timeline, one that existed independently of memory or interpretation. According to Alex's earlier statements, he had left Moselle after dinner, traveled to his mother's home, and later returned to discover the bodies. He described the time frames as ordinary, unremarkable. The phone data told a more complex story. In the minutes following the estimated time of the murders, Alex's phone showed a sudden increase in activity. The device recorded multiple steps, far more movement than his account suggested. The phone was picked up, handled, and moved in ways that did not align neatly with a man arriving home and reacting to a shocking discovery. There were also gaps. Periods where expected activity was absent. Calls that appeared to have been deleted. Moments where the phone went silent when, based on Alex's narrative, it should not have. Investigators did not treat these findings as conclusions. They treated them as questions. Why was there so much movement in such a short span of time? Why did certain actions occur before the 911 call, rather than after? Why did the phone record behavior inconsistent with shock or hesitation? Individually, each data point could be explained away. Together, they formed a pattern that resisted easy explanation. As analysts layered phone activity over Alex's spoken statements, small inconsistencies multiplied. The confidence of his earlier account gave way to a timeline that required adjustment, minute by minute, detail by detail. This was not speculation. It was documentation. And unlike spoken words, the phone did not adapt its story. It recorded what happened. And as investigators continued their analysis, it became clear that Alex Murdaugh's phone was not simply a device he carried that night. It was a witness. One that quietly contradicted him. As investigators examined Alex Murdaugh's phone, they expanded the scope of their analysis to include another silent recorder, his vehicle. Alex drove an SUV equipped with OnStar, a system capable of logging location, speed, ignition cycles, and movement with precision. Unlike human recollection, this data operated continuously, without regard for intent or consequence. The vehicle's records allowed investigators to chart Alex's movements on the night of the murders in real time. According to Alex, his visit to his mother's home in Alameda was routine. He described staying briefly before returning to Moselle. The timeline he offered suggested a narrow window, one that accounted for travel, conversation, and the discovery of the bodies. The vehicle data challenged that sequence. OnStar logs showed when the vehicle was started and stopped. They recorded the route taken. They captured speed fluctuations and arrival times. When mapped against phone data, a clearer picture emerged. Alex's movements were faster than expected. Stops were shorter than described. And the margin for error was slim. Investigators noted how tightly compressed the timeline had become. The data suggested that Alex returned to Moselle and made the 911 call within minutes, leaving little room for the actions he claimed to have taken upon discovering Maggie and Paul. There was also the question of movement consistency. The vehicle data aligned with periods of phone activity that did not correspond with Alex's account. Actions that, according to his statements, should have occurred later appeared to have happened earlier. Once again, no single data point delivered an answer. But together, the phone and vehicle records formed a synchronized narrative, one that did not rely on memory, emotion, or interpretation. For investigators, this convergence was critical. It meant the case was no longer anchored to statements alone. It was anchored to systems designed to measure time and movement with accuracy. And with every mile logged and every timestamp confirmed, the space between Alex Murdaugh's story and the documented record continued to narrow. The margin for coincidence was disappearing, and the margin for explanation was shrinking with it. The final digital record came from Maggie Murdaugh's phone. Unlike Alex's device, Maggie's phone stopped telling its story abruptly. Investigators determined that Maggie's phone showed normal activity earlier in the evening: calls, messages, and routine use consistent with an ordinary night at Moselle. Then, at a specific moment, that activity ceased. There were no outgoing calls, no messages sent, no screen activations. The silence itself became evidence. Later, the phone was located some distance from the kennels, along the side of a roadway. It had not remained where Maggie fell. It had been moved. The data preserved on the device allowed analysts to determine when it last registered interaction, when it stopped recording steps, and when it was no longer handled. Those timestamps were precise. When placed alongside Alex's phone data and the vehicle records, Maggie's phone added a crucial layer of confirmation. Her device went silent at a time that aligned with the narrowed window established by the kennel video and Alex's activity logs. The convergence was not dramatic, but it was exact. There were no frantic messages sent after that moment. No calls were placed seeking help. No evidence of movement beyond that point. For investigators, this mattered. It meant Maggie had not survived long enough to use her phone. It meant the events unfolded quickly. And it meant the timeline was no longer flexible. Taken together, the digital records told a unified story, one created not by interpretation, but by systems designed to record reality as it occurred. Alex's phone showed movement. His vehicle showed timing. Maggie's phone showed silence. Each device captured a different aspect of the same window of time. And when those records were aligned, the result was unavoidable. The evidence was no longer fragmented. It was coherent. And for the first time, the investigation had a timeline that did not depend on what Alex Murdaugh said had happened, but on what the data showed had occurred. By the time investigators had aligned the digital evidence, Alex Murdaugh's original account could no longer stand unchanged. What followed was not an admission but a recalibration. As law enforcement returned to Alex with specific questions, his story began to evolve. Not dramatically, not all at once, but subtly, in ways that suggested adjustment rather than correction. Details that had once been firm became uncertain. Timelines softened. Language shifted from certainty to approximation. Alex no longer spoke in absolutes. He spoke in possibilities. He acknowledged that he may have gone to the kennels earlier than he first recalled, that he might have been mistaken about certain times, that stress and shock could have affected his memory. Each revision appeared reasonable in isolation. Together, they formed a pattern. Investigators noted that the changes did not introduce new information. They responded to existing evidence. Each adjustment aligned his narrative slightly closer to what the data already showed, without ever fully matching it. This mattered, because genuine memory errors tend to reveal new, previously unconsidered details. What Alex offered instead were refinements, modifications that reduced contradiction without eliminating it. The kennel video forced one shift. Phone data required another. Vehicle records narrowed the window further. With each step, Alex's version of events became more complex and less stable. The effect was cumulative. What had once been a simple account now required careful explanation. The story could no longer be told cleanly from start to finish without qualification. For investigators, this was not evidence of guilt. It was evidence of instability. Truth tends to remain consistent over time. Fabrication adapts. By the end of these interviews, Alex Murdaugh's statements no longer formed a single narrative. They existed as layers, each shaped by what had already been uncovered. And as pressure increased, the question shifted. Not whether Alex had been dishonest, but how far that dishonesty might extend when confronted with consequences. The answer would arrive sooner than anyone expected. And it would not come quietly. On September 4, 2021, nearly 3 months after the murders at Moselle, Alex Murdaugh called 911 once again. This time, he was the victim. He reported that he had been shot on the side of a rural road while changing a tire. According to Alex, a passing vehicle stopped, a man exited, and he fired at him before driving away. The injury was superficial. The circumstances were unusual, and the timing raised immediate questions. At this point, Alex was no longer just a grieving husband and father. He was under mounting scrutiny. His financial dealings at his law firm were beginning to unravel. Civil lawsuits tied to the boat crash were advancing. Pressure was closing in from multiple directions. The roadside shooting appeared, at first, to reset the narrative. Public attention shifted. Sympathy resurfaced. Speculation reignited. But investigators approached the incident differently. The details did not hold. The wound did not align with Alex's description of the shooting. Evidence at the scene failed to corroborate an ambush. And the timeline surrounding the event quickly became inconsistent. Within days, the story collapsed. Alex admitted that the shooting had been staged. He had arranged for an acquaintance to shoot him so his surviving son, Buster, could collect on a life insurance policy. The confession marked a turning point. For the first time, Alex Murdaugh acknowledged orchestrating a violent act and lying about it from the outset. The implications were immediate and severe. This was not a misremembered detail, not a stressed recollection, not a narrative adjustment. It was deliberate deception. The roadside incident reframed everything that had come before it. Investigators and prosecutors no longer had to infer a willingness to manipulate reality. It had been demonstrated. Public perception shifted decisively. The image of a man overwhelmed by tragedy gave way to something darker, a pattern of behavior defined by control, calculation, and desperation. The lie had not ended at Moselle. It had multiplied. And now, it had a life of its own, one that would pull investigators deeper into Alex Murdaugh's past and closer to the foundation of the case that would eventually be brought against him. What began as a single falsehood was revealing itself as a system. And that system was beginning to fail. Investigators uncovered evidence that Alex had used a network of personal and shell accounts to move money in ways designed to avoid detection. In some cases, clients were told their cases were unresolved, while the funds had already been paid and spent. The amounts were staggering. Millions of dollars unaccounted for. Years of misconduct hidden behind reputation and routine. These were not impulsive decisions. They required planning, consistency, and confidence that the system would not challenge him. For a long time, it didn't. Alex's position within the legal community insulated him. His name opened doors. His family history discouraged scrutiny. Trust replaced oversight. But once the roadside incident forced a closer look, the protections fell away. Audits began. Records were reviewed. Patterns emerged. What investigators saw was not a man suddenly in financial distress, but one who had been quietly managing collapse for years. And with every fraudulent transaction uncovered, the context surrounding June 7, 2021, became more defined. This was not about sympathy, and it was not about excuses. It was about pressure. The financial crimes revealed that Alex Murdaugh's world had already begun to close in on itself, long before the murders at Moselle. The money was gone, and the consequences were catching up. As the financial irregularities came into focus, the consequences spread quickly, reaching the institution that had long anchored Alex Murdaugh's power, his law firm. For generations, the Murdaugh name had been synonymous with legal authority in South Carolina's Lowcountry. The firm itself was respected, well-established, and deeply connected. That reputation did not survive scrutiny. Internal reviews revealed missing funds tied directly to cases Alex had handled. Payments that should have gone to clients had been diverted. Accounting discrepancies could no longer be explained away as clerical errors. The firm confronted him. In early September 2021, just days before the staged roadside shooting, Alex was forced to resign. The timing was not incidental. The confrontation stripped away his professional identity. The firm froze accounts. Colleagues who had once trusted him now questioned his integrity. The institutional shield that had protected him for decades was gone. For the first time, Alex faced consequences that could not be managed through relationships or reputation. The fallout was immediate. Law enforcement agencies opened formal investigations. Civil lawsuits accelerated. Clients began coming forward. What had been concealed through complexity was now exposed through documentation. The collapse of the law firm represented more than professional failure. It marked the end of control. Alex was no longer directing outcomes. He was reacting to them. And as investigators widened their focus, it became clear that the financial crimes were not isolated to a handful of cases. They spanned years, involved multiple victims, and followed consistent methods. The system that had sustained Alex Murdaugh was unraveling in real time. And as it did, the question of when the murders occurred took on new significance. Because the collapse did not happen in a vacuum. It happened under pressure. And pressure, as investigators would later argue, changes behavior. By the fall of 2021, the pattern was no longer abstract. The financial crimes, the law firm's collapse, the staged shooting, they were not separate events. They were converging. Investigators and prosecutors would later emphasize a critical point. The murders did not occur during a period of stability. They occurred at a moment when Alex Murdaugh's control was eroding rapidly. Civil litigation tied to the 2019 boat crash was advancing. Financial disclosures were imminent. Court-ordered transparency threatened to expose years of misconduct. The walls were closing in. The money that had once allowed Alex to manage crises, to settle problems quietly, to delay consequences, was gone. The systems that had protected him were failing simultaneously. This context mattered, not as justification, not as an excuse, but as an explanation of pressure. Investigators did not argue that financial stress alone leads to violence. They argued that in Alex Murdaugh's case, it removed options he had relied on his entire life. There were no more delays, no more diversions, no more influence to deploy. The timeline revealed that by June 2021, Alex was approaching a point of exposure that could not be managed through deception alone. And when that exposure arrived, it arrived all at once. The murders at Moselle occurred not at the beginning of Alex's unraveling, but near the center of it. At a moment when reputation, finances, and legal standing were simultaneously under threat. For prosecutors, this convergence would later form the backbone of motive. Not greed, not rage, but collapse. A collapse already in motion, one that the evidence suggested Alex Murdaugh believed he could still control. What followed would determine whether that belief could survive contact with a courtroom. And by this point in the story, the question was no longer whether Alex Murdaugh had been living a lie. It was whether the truth had finally outrun him. When the case against Alex Murdaugh finally reached the courtroom, prosecutors faced a challenge that extended beyond evidence. They were not just trying a homicide. They were trying a narrative. From the outset, the prosecution made a deliberate choice. This would not be a case built on speculation, emotion, or character assassination. It would be a case built on sequence, on time, movement, and contradiction. Their strategy was methodical. Rather than beginning with motive, prosecutors began with facts that could not be argued away. Digital records, timelines, physical evidence, statements given by Alex himself. The jury was asked to understand one central premise. If Alex Murdaugh did not tell the truth about where he was and what he was doing, then the question became why. The kennel video served as the cornerstone. Prosecutors positioned it not as a dramatic reveal but as a quiet contradiction, one that forced the jury to reconsider everything Alex had said before and after June 7, 2021. They emphasized its ordinariness, the lack of tension, the absence of chaos, and then they emphasized the lie. From there, the case unfolded chronologically. Phone data was layered over Alex's statements. Vehicle records were matched to travel claims. Maggie's phone activity was aligned with the estimated time of death. Each element reinforced the next. Prosecutors avoided overreach. They did not claim to know Alex's thoughts. They focused instead on what he did, and when he did it. The financial crimes were introduced carefully, not as proof of violent intent, but as context, as evidence of mounting pressure, as an explanation for why Alex's life, as he knew it, was unraveling in the weeks and months leading up to the murders. Crucially, the prosecution framed Alex's behavior after the killings as part of the same pattern. The shifting statements, the roadside shooting, the admitted deception. These were not presented as unrelated acts but as continuations, evidence of how Alex responded when control slipped away. By the time prosecutors rested, they had not asked the jury to accept a single dramatic moment. They had asked them to follow a trail built from records, not recollection, from timestamps, not testimony. And at its center stood a man whose story had changed, but whose data had not. The prosecution's case was not loud. It was cumulative, and it was designed to leave the jury with a single, unavoidable conclusion. Alex Murdaugh did not just survive the collapse of his world. He tried to manage it, and when management failed, the truth became impossible to contain. The defense faced a fundamentally different task. They did not need to prove what happened at Moselle. They needed to introduce doubt. From the outset, Alex Murdaugh's attorneys framed the case as one built on assumption rather than certainty. They argued that while the prosecution had assembled an extensive digital timeline, it had not produced direct evidence tying Alex to the act of murder itself. No eyewitnesses. No murder weapon was recovered. No forensic evidence places blood or gunshot residue on Alex at the moment of the killings. The defense leaned heavily on that absence. They emphasized the chaotic nature of the crime scene, the presence of multiple firearms on the property, the lack of a clear motive that demanded immediate violence. When addressing the kennel video, the defense acknowledged Alex's presence, but reframed the lie. They argued that fear, shock, and addiction had driven Alex to deny being at the kennels. That his dishonesty, while damaging, did not equate to murder. In this version of events, Alex was not a calculating killer. He was a flawed man unraveling under immense pressure. The defense also focused on the timeline's narrowness. They suggested that the window of time was too tight to allow Alex to commit the murders, clean himself, and dispose of evidence without detection. They raised alternative possibilities, unidentified assailants, lingering resentment tied to the boat crash, and unknown enemies created through decades of legal work. Importantly, the defense sought to compartmentalize Alex's behavior. Financial crimes were financial crimes. Lies were lies. Violence, they argued, was something else entirely. They warned the jury against conflating moral failure with criminal guilt. Throughout the trial, Alex himself took the stand, an uncommon and risky move. He admitted to lying. He admitted to stealing. He admitted to staging the roadside shooting. But he denied killing his wife and son. The defense's strategy hinged on one critical belief: that the jury could accept Alex Murdaugh as a liar without accepting him as a murderer. Whether that distinction could hold would depend not on argument alone, but on how the jury processed what came next. Because the final phase of the trial would not revolve around theory. It would revolve around people, and what they saw, heard, and remembered. As the trial moved into its final phase, the focus shifted from strategy to substance. The courtroom became a place not just of argument but of observation. Witness by witness, the jury was asked to reconcile two competing realities: the man Alex Murdaugh said he was and the man described by those who knew him best. Law enforcement officers detailed the early hours of the investigation, Alex's demeanor, his phrasing, and the moments where his account seemed rehearsed rather than recalled. They spoke carefully, avoiding interpretation, focusing instead on what they observed. Digital forensic experts followed. They walked the jury through timelines with precision, explaining how phone data is recorded, how steps are logged, and how orientation changes are tracked. They emphasized reliability, not implication. This was not speculation. It was a process. Each expert reinforced the same conclusion. The data was consistent, internally validated, and resistant to manipulation. Then came the witnesses closest to the victims. Friends described Maggie's routines, her use of her phone, and her comfort at Moselle. Paul's friends spoke about the kennel video, how unmistakable the voices were, how ordinary the moment sounded. The most consequential testimony came when Alex Murdaugh took the stand himself. 4 days, the jury watched as he admitted to a pattern of deception that spanned years. He spoke openly about addiction, theft, and betrayal. He acknowledged lying to investigators, repeatedly. But when questioned about the murders, he drew a line. He denied pulling the trigger, denied harming Maggie and Paul, denied involvement in their deaths. The contrast was stark. A man willing to admit to nearly everything, except the one act that mattered most. Prosecutors did not need to argue forcefully at this stage. They let the testimony speak. They let the jury consider why someone would lie about being at the kennels, unless the truth carried consequences worse than exposure. By the time closing arguments approached, the trial had delivered its payoff. Not in drama, not in spectacle, but in accumulation. Every witness, every timestamp, and every statement had added weight. The jury was no longer deciding between two equal stories. They were deciding whether the evidence, taken together, left room for reasonable doubt. And as deliberations approached, one reality had become unavoidable. The case against Alex Murdaugh was no longer about a single night. It was about a lifetime of control meeting a moment it could not survive. After weeks of testimony and hours of closing arguments, the courtroom fell quiet. The jury was sent to deliberate. Inside the jury room, there were no cameras, no narration, no spectacle. Just 12 individuals were tasked with weighing months of evidence against a single legal standard, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The deliberations did not stretch into days. After roughly 3 hours, the jury returned. Alex Murdaugh stood as the verdicts were read. Guilty of murder, twice. There was no visible outburst, no collapse. No declaration of innocence was shouted across the courtroom. Alex remained still, absorbing the words without response. The verdicts carried finality. For the prosecution, the outcome validated a case built not on a single piece of evidence, but on convergence, digital records, shifting statements, financial pressure, and a lie that could not be reconciled with the facts. For the defense, the strategy of separation, liar but not killer, had failed to hold. The court moved quickly to sentencing. Alex Murdaugh was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never walk free again. As the sentence was delivered, the tone remained restrained. The judge spoke directly, addressing not just the crime but the betrayal of trust, within a family, a profession, and a community. There was no grand moral pronouncement, just consequence. Outside the courtroom, reactions were immediate but measured. Family members of Maggie and Paul expressed relief without celebration. Legal analysts pointed to the strength of digital evidence. Observers noted how quietly the case had reached its end. The verdict did not resolve every question surrounding the Murdaugh name, but it resolved this one. Alex Murdaugh would not leave the justice system the way he had once entered it, with influence, familiarity, and control. He left it convicted. And with that, the legal chapter of the Moselle murders closed, not with spectacle, but with a sentence that reflected the weight of the evidence and the permanence of the loss. What remained was the aftermath, and the legacy of a lie that could not outpace the truth. The verdict closed the courtroom chapter of the Murdaugh case, but it did not end the story. In the months that followed, appeals were filed, shifting the focus from evidence to process. Financial crimes moved forward independently through the courts, exposing years of misconduct in detail. Long-standing questions surrounding earlier deaths were revisited and re-examined under the weight of what had now been proven. The case did not conclude with a single judgment. It widened. What made the Murdaugh murders resonate far beyond South Carolina was not only the violence but also what the investigation ultimately revealed. For decades, power shaped outcomes. Reputation discouraged scrutiny. Silence provided protection. Until evidence intervened. Phones preserved what people denied. Data recorded what memory attempted to revise. Systems designed to measure reality outlasted influence. The collapse was not sudden. It was cumulative. A lie undone by a video. A narrative narrowed by timestamps. A story overtaken by records that could not be persuaded. This case mattered because it demonstrated a fundamental truth. Power can control a narrative, but it cannot control documented reality forever. If you value stories told with evidence, restraint, and accountability, consider subscribing to Dark Crime Casefiles. We document cases where power once controlled the narrative, and where truth eventually refused to stay hidden. New investigations are published regularly. Turn on notifications if you want to follow them as they unfold. Because at Dark Crime Casefiles, no crime stays in the dark.